On the 24th of February this year, shock swept across the airwaves as we heard Russia was invading Ukraine. The military build-up around the Ukrainian border since late 2021 was not just an intimidation tactic. The Russia-Ukrainian war had begun, and with it, the biggest threat to peace and security in Europe since the end of the Cold War. Since the UK lit up blue and yellow, over 12 million Ukrainians have fled their homes, and at the time of recording, 5,587 Ukrainian civilians have been killed. Beyond these figures we hear in the news, how are individual lives affected by the horror of war?
Oh my God, this is like my whole life, working hard to help my mom and repay for everything she's done for me. And if this window's like shatter, this is basically our lives, gonna shatter as well.
Why are these stories so important to hear? And in the UK, with 80 years since the Liverpool Blitz, what broader value is there in sharing our own experiences of war?
And the full story was never really told about the impact of the people. And I think that was, for a lot of people, that's been a big issue, the fact that their experiences have never really been recognised or acknowledged.
This is the National Museums Liverpool Podcast. I'm content producer Megan India McGurk, and we, alongside our partners Melodic Distraction Radio, will thread together stories from our collections with experiences of people in Liverpool today, exploring connections between the past and present. Katerina Zabello has lived in Kiev for the last 7 years, where she met her Scouse boyfriend Peter. Twice a week, she wakes up early to make her way to ballet class before work. Working as a brand manager, it's been stressful lately, and she's looking forward to Saturday when she goes to her weekly art lecture. The 8-year-long conflict between Russia and Ukraine has been increasing in intensity over the last 2 weeks, and in the evenings, Katya is frequently brought to tears as she reads Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Katya and Peter have both packed emergency backpacks with food and medicine. Peter suggests a week away. A break would do them both good. But as she walks the familiar streets of Kiev that morning, there is a fresh tension in the air.
I remember going outside to my ballet practice early in the morning, and they were, I'm not sure if you guys have that in Britain, but this is services that take care of apartment buildings from the government. So they check the tubes, they check, the gas, everything for the house maintenance, kind of. And you rarely see them outside. But that morning, I remember on my way to the subway, every single entrance to the apartment buildings, they had a brigade of this service checking under the buildings. And I thought, oh no, if they need to check if it's okay under the building, it probably means that they need to make sure that people can get under the building, in a shelter. And because it was basically every single building on my way to the subway, that was so unusual that it made me think that, oh my gosh, they are really worried.
After seeing these workmen on the streets, Katya makes a call to her mother. You need to pack an emergency backpack. She then packs her own small suitcase for a week's holiday and leaves for the west of Ukraine. At 4 a.m. on the 24th of February, Katya and Peter wake to the sound of planes flying overhead.
I woke up early, I think it was 4 a.m., because of the sound of planes. You can never forget it. It's awful. It's right over your head, and it's 30 minutes of just planes flying over your head. And my boyfriend, he woke me up and he was like, oh, it started. And I'm like, what do you mean, what started? And what do you mean have started? He's like, the war, it's obvious.
Katya calls her mother and tries to calm her tears. She shouts down the phone to one of her friends to rouse her from her sleep. At 5 a.m., she pushes her and Peter to hit the 24/7 store. Recalling wartime lessons from her grandmother, they buy beans and pasta and take out cash.
We had to go to the ATM to get some cash because you never know now. It's a war. What if the bank shuts down? What if the scanners for cards, don't work anymore? You have no idea what's happened. So again, we went to get the cash, and that's when Ivano-Frankivsk got bombed. So we were right in the middle of this right center of a city, and we heard the sirens, and there's nowhere to go because it's the main square. There's no shelter there. And so everyone just stopped, frozen, for a couple of seconds when the first sound started. Because it's the first time for a lot of people they've ever heard a siren. Everyone just froze, looked at each other, oh, what do we do next? And then a lot of people just started running, and a lot of people at the same time I'll just carry on with my life, I don't know, what was it, a coping mechanism, it's not real or something, I don't know. So, so we kind of hid under the roof of a building, took the cash, went back home, made sure we were all packed, but then we were okay, but where are we gonna go? So we all packed, but we don't have a car. None of us know how to drive. And where would you want to go?
Katya and Peter have just survived their first air raid. Neither of them drive, and they're far from home. Their next thought is probably not one you'd expect.
We thought that we haven't eaten, so it's a perfect moment to go and donate blood. So at first, we were a bit worried to go out. What if there's bombing again? But because it's west of Ukraine, it was a bit less intense than other parts. So we decided to take a risk and go and donate blood. So we were not the only one donated blood, of course, and that was shocking for me. When we arrived at the blood donation center, there was already a huge queue of people standing outside, willing to donate blood. So just hundreds of people waiting there, and I think what made me really think about how great my people and the country is when we were in the queue and we were already approaching the entrance, but there were so many people in the queue behind us that someone ran to a nurse to ask what time do they close, because they wanted to know if it's worth standing in the queue. And she said, we close at 4 p.m., but we're going to be here until the very last person who wanted to donate blood does it.
Back at the Airbnb, Katya and Peter are lucky with where they're staying. Their hosts are part of the Catholic organisation, the Order of Malta, and have a makeshift bunker they allowed them and neighbouring families to stay in. Here, Katya took care of the children.
So that was the first time in my life the kids liked me. Because I find it very hard to interact with kids. They just were so scared, poor things, that they just, 5 of them just hugged me. And we just sat there like that, just me hugging them and, calming them down, telling them that everything's going to be okay, trying to play the toys and everything. So there were a lot of people the first night. And then on the second day, I think parents, they took a decision to take kids to the villages, so away from the city, closer, to the mountains where there's no, the risk of getting a missile hit is lower. So we said goodbye to the families with kids, and it was just me, Pisha, a couple of other neighbors, and elderly who just refused to leave. My responsibility was to get the elderly neighbors down, which was very hard because all the people, they're very stubborn. So I understand them, and they're like, no, I'm not going down. If that's the way I go, that's the way I go. And I had to be no, you're not going anywhere because we're taking you into safety. So this is not the way you go.
From the bunker, Katya also continued to work. She spoke of the war effort, how as the war broke out, donations flooded to the military and the NGO Come Back Alive, and how if you're working, you're earning, you're paying tax, and you can donate.
So it's not like I was like stepping up for a lot of stuff, not at all, because, I'm like a super regular, like, young woman. That's all, very regular. So it's just everyone has to do their own bit, because while the men were like securing the perimeter, so, for me, that was, okay, so I take care of kids then. It's just, everyone was doing a little part. So everyone is super caring and looking after each other. Of course, there's always some people that are not, but there you can find them everywhere in every country. So, but in majority, it's just everyone knew that you just do what you can, and you'll be fine then if everyone does their own part.
Katya had to face the impossibility of returning to Kiev and try to gain a visa to live with Peter in Liverpool. Coordinating from the bunker, there were many complications with even beginning the visa process. But on day 5, she received some good news. She was in the system. She needed to get to Budapest to the visa centre, and by some miracle, the host had a volunteer going to help Maltesers at the Ukrainian border. They had their lift. The drive took them straight to the border, but as the car pulled out, leaving them behind, they realised they couldn't pass on foot. The pedestrian crossing was miles away, and looking around, the stark reality sank in. They were stuck in a field.
We finally managed to walk to the tiny village, but it looked really dead. Everything was shut, though it was like midday. And there was just a guy driving in a car. He saw us with our, belongings, and he stopped. He asked us, "Oh, are you guys from Ukraine?" For me, at the moment, I was really scared of getting into the car because I had no idea who that is. And Peter was telling me stories about how when crises like this happen, there are people who jump on the opportunity to take advantage. And there is a problem of human trafficking when the crises happen at the border. So I remembered all of it, and it was very scary to get in the car. We just didn't have any other choice.
After 40 minutes in the village, they hadn't seen a bus, a person, a dog, nothing. Rather than risk being stranded in the cold as night fell, they got into his car.
But thank God, he was really a genuinely very helpful guy. And turns out that he was a volunteer who lives not far away. He's Hungarian. And he was just helping, giving people lifts from the refugee center to nearby towns where they could find some home to sleep overnight. So he offered us a lift to the refugee center.
At the refugee center, Peter went from person to person, trying to find anyone going to Budapest.
And he found a woman, she's a journalist from Britain. And he was like, "Oh, guys, hi, I'm also British. Like, where are you going after that?" And turns out they were going to Budapest. So that they said, "Don't worry, like, we'll give you a lift then." And so we waited for them a couple of hours to finish interviewing people. And they gave us a lift to Budapest. And in Budapest, we had a small room in a hotel that Peter rented. And we stayed there a couple more days, like almost a week, waiting for my visa response, going to the visa center. Finally got the visa and booked the ticket to go from Budapest to Liverpool.
Now Katya is living in Liverpool with Peter. Arriving here, she felt for the first time a sigh of relief. But it is far from over. Her own mother is still in Kiev, and what she has lost is hard to comprehend.
So I had, everything I needed in Ukraine. I was genuinely very, very happy just waking up, going to my job. I come from a really poor family. I was just grown up with just my mother. And so all my life I've been working to help my mom and renovate the house. And this sounds silly, but so I was working really hard since 18 to help her do the renovations in the house that's super old. So the first thing we did was balcony windows. And her dream was always to have this balcony where the windows are from top to bottom. It's windows, like glass. And so I worked hard for that to get the money so I could do that for her. And then we did it. And then the war broke in. And seriously, when I felt how the windows were trembling, and I was scared that the windows are going to break in winter, it's going to be freezing. I also thought, oh my God, this is my whole life, working hard to help my mom and repay for everything she's done for me, everything nice she's done for me. And if this window's shatter, this is basically our lives, gonna shatter as well.
Speaking to Katya, only in this moment did her stoicism flicker. Through her many brave decisions and selfless actions, she was calm and matter-of-fact when recalling her experience. She's keen to explain how fellow Ukrainians still in the country have to maintain a greater strength every day.
It was very important not to freak out and just go into a pit of this desperation because the life is still going on, and you're most useful when you are in your proper state of mind. So if you go down to the pit, then you're useless. You can't help people around you. You can't help yourself. If you start crying, just breaking down, then I'm a problem, not to just myself, but the people around you, because now they have to leave their things and problems behind and take care of me instead of, helping maybe someone or even themselves. So you can't do that. You have to go on with your life. You have moments when you break down and you cry and everything, but you have to work. You have to make dinner, so you fed, so you operational, you can operate. So see, for me, that was on 5 days. I still have my mom and some of my former colleagues back in Ukraine who do this every day. So my mom, she goes to work. Then there's a siren, but they work. They need to work. So they would do. She's a teacher, so she conducts classes while there are sirens. They just go to the shelter and then they continue their job from the shelter. Because if you don't, then everything stops. Everything collapses.
You cannot help but be affected by Katya's story and think of the countless other Ukrainians in similar situations. She is quick to explain how her experience is far from the worst. But through talking and sharing her account, she hopes to keep Ukraine in people's hearts and help her friends and family back home. Up next, Melodic distraction presenter Toby Taylor looks at a life lived closer to home, that of blitz survivor Jim Deacon, and how viewing just one archive photo unlocked his story.
For the people of Liverpool, the Blitz had a devastating impact on the city. While much of the reports at the time centred around the damage done to London, in Merseyside, more than 4,000 civilians were killed and 70,000 people made homeless during air raids. With World War II fostering the beginning of the infamous keep calm and carry on mindset, do the years that have passed offer space for us to reflect on a life built back from the rubble? Jim's initial experience of the war was relatively peaceful. Aged just 2.5 years old, he was evacuated to Marton in Shropshire, alongside his 2 sisters and mother Ethel. At that time, in Britain at least, the full scale of the war was yet to be realised. As told by Val Deegan, Jim's widow, Jim enjoyed life in the countryside, making the most of his new surroundings.
It's a lovely little village. I think he quite enjoyed village life. If anything, it was a bit of an adventure.
With the war seemingly far away and the situation showing no sign of changing, Jim's mother Ethel decided to briefly return home for a weekend in Liverpool to see Jim's father, who was an air raid warden. The pair were barely back a day when the realities of war were brought terrifyingly home. On the 3rd of May 1941, their first night back in the city, the air raid sirens rang out. Jim's father was away on duty, and having been out in the countryside, Ethel was unfamiliar with the air raid shelter routine. In the midst of the chaos, she decided to shelter under the stairs of their home at 3 Index Street in Walton, Liverpool. That night, a a parachute mine was dropped on their home street. The resulting explosion completely destroyed half the road and flattened Jim's parents' house. Val recounts the horrifying aftermath of the explosion for Jim.
It was just an unfortunate coincidence that Hitler decided to do an intensive bombing campaign on the Liverpool docks for a week at the beginning of May, and that's when the bomb hit. The real shock about it was that when the bomb fell, Jim's mum was killed, but he himself was under the rubble for 2 days before they pulled him out. And obviously every time I see something on the news about earthquakes and whatnot, I naturally think of him.
78 years later, in 2019, Jim and Val visited the Blitz Liverpool Lives exhibition at the Museum of Liverpool. It combines images of devastation across the city taken by Liverpool City Police during the Blitz, with oral histories from those who directly experienced events at the time. Jim and Val were struck by the first photograph on display, which stood out for the sheer amount of destruction on show. What had been a busy residential street was now unrecognisable as such, with little left to identify it other than the road that ran through the middle of it. Flanking the road on either side are vast piles of rubble, where rows of terraced houses once stood. Looking at this picture, there is one overriding thought. How could anyone survive this? This is Index Street. The image showed the aftermath of the raid which had killed Jim's mother and left him buried under rubble for 2 days. It's hard to imagine just how Jim must have felt standing in front of a photograph that depicted the site of his mother's death and where he quite possibly could have been lying injured.
The photographs, they were striking. I don't know if it had all sunk in, all the things that had happened. I think he was, surprised at the intensity of it all. It's such a great big pile of rubble. Half the street disappeared. You just can't ignore it. The visual impact is amazing. It triggered off memories of sorts.
Jim's life, though, had moved on since the events of the war. After he was treated for his injuries and discharged from hospital, he was looked after by relatives and evacuated to Shropshire to be reunited with his sisters. After the war, Jim returned to Liverpool for the first time in nearly 4 years to live with his father, who had remarried. Despite his traumatic wartime experiences in Liverpool, Jim still held the city, and in particular the Mersey, which was bustling with shipping at the time, close to his heart. Partly inspired by the ships he'd seen on the river, Jim left Liverpool aged 16 to have a long and successful career as an engineer in the Navy. There, he met his wife Val, and together they had many happy memories, including travelling across the world.
He said he was very struck by the first sight of the Mersey, because, it was just full of shipping in those days. You look at the horizon and you think, what's beyond there? It sort of draws you somehow. And I think he was a bit like that as well. You see, I have the wanderlust, and our ambition was to visit every continent before we died, and we actually pulled that off. We used to travel quite a lot.
Jim and Val left a visitor response to the photograph of Index Street, which was picked up by Kay Jones, the exhibition's curator, and with Jim and Val's permission, incorporated into the wider exhibition. Jim went on to live a full and happy life, but the Blitz Liverpool Lives exhibition proved a cathartic experience for him and many others. It provides a platform for survivors such as Jim to share their stories, often for the first time. For Kay, this is one of the reasons for curating the exhibition in a way that encouraged visitor participation for those who lived through the war. She explains how enabling survivors to tell their stories also provides them with a sense of agency over their own narrative.
One of the issues is that the story was subject to censorship at the time, and then the full story was never really told about the impact of the people. And I think that was, for a lot of people, that's been a big issue, the fact that their experiences have never really been recognised or acknowledged. So imagine how important that is to finally be able to tell that story and be recognised that your experience was incredibly important. You've got to imagine all the hundreds of people this was happening to all at the same time, that absolute chaos in the city. No one probably took the time to check that you were okay and to kind of talk about it and kind of explore your feelings and things like that. You would have just thought, well, I'm just one of the many, many families that this is happening to. So I think maybe kind of in retrospect, when people have had time to kind of think about that, to process and reflect, and then to see their personal story in an exhibition is really, really meaningful.
Hearing this, it makes me think of the role museums play in the remembrance and preservation of individual experiences. They create a collective memory and possibly even a healing effect in the aftermath of conflict? Can they also help younger generations reach a deeper level of understanding from their predecessors, one that we can extend to those across the world?
Seeing those kind of distilled interviews alongside the incredibly powerful images, and then in addition, people's kind of responses and memories that I've added to the exhibition since, I think it just really brings home that human cost of war. And I think obviously lots of parallels with what's going on around the world today. So I think for a lot of people sharing their stories, they hope to kind of that people will learn from their experiences, even in relation to kind of experiences that people are going through elsewhere in the world, and thinking that actually it's not that different. It's maybe 80 years ago, but really it's still in living memory, isn't it? It's not that far removed from what's happening today to what was happening on our very streets not that long ago.
While Jim could enjoy his years after the war, for Katya, at least for now, the story is quite different, as she fights each day alongside the people of Ukraine with humility and strength. For both, speaking out has power, whether to defy censorship, foster connection and build support, or aid healing and recovery. As the challenges of the war affect us all, we hope we can at least keep listening. Thank you for listening to the National Museums Liverpool podcast. For more information on how you can stand with Ukraine, head to the gov.uk website for guidance. You can also find out more about the Blitz at the Blitz Liverpool Lives exhibition at Museum of Liverpool until the end of 2022. And for more stories like this, from across our varied collections, from Liverpool film to Heroes on the Mersey, please subscribe. You can find all our episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts.